I will pass to Nick Sorensen, who is going to be our first presenter for today.
Thank you, Chair. Well, welcome and good afternoon, or whatever time it is for you. I'm very pleased to be invited to contribute to this symposium, to share my ideas with an international audience. I've been studying improvisation for over 40 years now, as a jazz musician, as an educator, as an academic. And latterly, I've been very interested in applying insights from the practice of improvisation in music and the arts to social context, and specifically, actually, the way that teachers improvise. My PhD research looked at the advanced professional practice of secondary school teachers in order to articulate what kind of relationship there was between expertise and improvisation. And I've conceptualized this in terms of the concept of the improvising teacher. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but then also about how we engage with the professional development of the improvising teacher. And I'm going to conclude with some remarks about how this might require a conceptualization of what it means to be professional. So I'm aware I'm going to be covering quite a few ideas in a rather short time. You can see my email address there, and I'm very happy for you to email me if you wish to engage in any kind of discussion. So my research involved a comparative case study of outstanding teachers in 5 secondary schools in the southwest of England. And the grounded theory model that you see in front of you was derived from the research findings, from the analysis of observations and interviews with these teachers. And it shows the view of expertise that emerged. But the point is that that view of expertise overlapped very clearly with the way that we understand improvisation. And I want to just draw out 3 important aspects of that. And the first is at the center is that these teachers that I talked to actually didn't see themselves as experts, but they were aware that they may well be on a journey to become an expert at some point. And in terms of improvisation, this is actually quite interesting, because when we improvise, we've got no idea where we're going. We're involved in the activity, and where it takes us, well, that's not predictable. Their practice was grounded in dialogic teaching, and they were experts in engaging and creating conversational opportunities for learning with their pupils. And obviously a conversation is fundamentally an improvisational interaction. And then the third aspect, which really emphasized the relationship between expertise and improvisation, is this issue about being yourself. Now, every jazz musician aspires to create their own sound, that with just maybe 1 or 2 notes, they can actually be identified. And these teachers saw that it was really important to be themselves in the classroom and also to personalize the classroom environment. So the question is this transferable to other phases of education? Well, I think listening to many of the talks today, of course it is. I mean, we can learn from each other, whatever phase they're in. So I think it's certainly very appropriate to use this as a basis for looking at teaching in higher education. So how do you go about developing the improvising teacher? Well, I think that there are 2 sides to this. The first one is actually to do with the attitude that you have, what Senge calls metanoia, having a fundamental shift of mind, that actually you are open to and that you understand what improvisation is. And there are 3 important dispositions. One is that you give yourself permission to improvise, and also culturally, and we've talked a lot about culture today, the culture that you're in also accepts that it is important that you improvise. The other shift of mind is that you are open to adapting what you do, that nothing you do is fixed, and you understand that both within action and on action, there is the potential for adaptation. And the third shift of mind is that you want to personalize your approach to teaching and engage with your students in a human way. So there's having an attitude, a disposition to improvise, which is really important. But also, sorry, I'll go back. Also, there are 4 key skills, and these skills are taken from the way that comedians, the way that musicians, that dancers, that actors learn to improvise well. And there are 4 key skills, and the first one is noticing. Now, the classrooms are really complex environments, and what improvisers are good at is actually noticing all the things that are around them. But having noticed those, they see those things as being an opportunity that they can respond to, an opportunity that they can bring that into their teaching. We've already talked about dialogue being really important, and being able to create a dialogue, the way that you listen and involve students, and that you make it a real exchange, that you're really building on what is in the classroom, is really important. And expert improvising teachers actually have a very strong repertoire of call and response strategies. Now, dialogue throws up all sorts of things. Some things that students say might be on target, and others actually might be a little bit irrelevant and wide of the mark. And an improvising teacher is able to make connections between these seemingly disparate ideas and actually brings unconnected things together to make sense. And the final skill is adapting. And I think probably when most people think about improvisation and teaching, that's what they think about, is that in the lesson, they are engaged with doing something, and they need to adapt what they're doing. So those are the 4 key skills that I think can be developed in everybody, alongside this, the dispositions to improvise. So that raises the question, well, what comes first? Is it the disposition or the skills? And I actually think that it's a bit chicken and the egg, really. There's a symbiotic relationship between them. And for some people, they'll start to improvise, and then from that, they'll start to build their mindset. Others will have a disposition to improvise, and then they'll try and start building the skills. So how might we go about running workshops to encourage teachers to be able to do this? Well, one way that I approach my workshops is in 3 parts. I will always begin with giving the participants an experience of improvisation. That might be a game, it might be an activity, it might even be a musical improvisation, throwing them in at the deep end, then having a discussion about what that felt like and how that relates to their experience of teaching. Then out of that, I would then take one of the 4 skills and specifically work on developing those through games and activities, and through discussion talk about how they might want to incorporate into their practice. And so that the final part of the workshop would involve them actually creating a short action plan for something that they're going to try and develop within their teaching over the next few days or weeks, so that when we come back for the next workshop, we can begin. What was your experience, and how did it go? What worked? What didn't work so well? What did you learn about it? How did it impact on your disposition to improvise? And what kind of skills do you need next? So it's an iterative cycle. And I think with all of these things, we know that you don't just learn to improvise immediately. It's something that you come back to again and again and again.
2 minutes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I think that there are a number of shifts that are going on that we've been talking about and that I'm talking about. There's a shift from excellence to expertise. There's an understanding that there is a relationship between expertise and improvisation. and there's a shift to develop an improvisation mindset. And I think that this actually begs us to say that we need to have an alternative conception of professionalism, and seeing professionalism not as something that teachers ought to do, but as a shifting phenomenon. And I would offer this as a way of reconceptualizing professionalism aligned with improvisation and expertise. And I've called this the authorized teacher. And the authorized teacher is somebody who acts with authenticity, who belongs to her or him or herself, who has opinions and practices that are entitled to acceptance, that they have authorization to teach in the way that they want to, they have the power to influence action, opinion, and belief, and that they are also authoring themselves, that writing, creating a professional identity within a critical framework that acknowledges the relationship between expertise and improvisation. So I'm going to end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. There's been, as usual, quite an exciting conversation in the chat. But if you would allow me, I would start with a question. If you can elaborate on what noticing skills mean in the context of teaching.
Yes, well, it's noticing. I mean, you could talk about it at 4 different levels. It's actually noticing where you are and who you are and what you're feeling at that moment and how you feel the lesson's going. It's also noticing about your students, about how they're reacting to how they're engaged with the with what you're teaching, and how they're engaged with the learning. Who are they sitting with? Do you need to actually move people around in different groups? It's being aware of the environment of the room. It's about being aware of what's happening outside of the room as well. I think linked with noticing is also this skill of knowing the pupils, about knowing who they are, knowing their names, maybe knowing a little bit about their background. And it's seeing all of these things as opportunities that you can comment on, make connections with.
Okay, thank you. We also had an interesting discussion between about the 2 terms of improvising and winging it. Yeah. If you can just elaborate a little on that, that would be lovely.
Sure, and I think that's one of the problems about when you talk about improvisation, that actually, I mean, it can mean lots of things to different people, and for some it has negative connotations and it has very positive connotations as well. So I think what we're talking about is the ability to improvise well, to see that it's an intentional activity, that you realize that, I mean, winging it in a way is part of it, but there's also much more to it than that. It's about developing a repertoire of responses, a repertoire of skills that you're honing and using in different ways. And I suppose I'm going to use a musical analogy, is that for a jazz musician, you learn everything that you possibly can about the piece of music you're playing, about music, about theory, and actually in the moment you just forget all about it and you just respond. And again, that's one of the connections with expertise, is that actually the difficulty of expertise for experts is they can't explain what they do, because a lot of what they do is tacit knowledge. So I think I am talking about a continuum, you could say. There's winging it at one end, and at times it's good to be able to do that, but that's not the be all and the end all. And that improvisation is a skill that you can develop so you can constructively and creatively and professionally engage in the moment with learning. Yeah, I'm just seeing things, I'm just a comment, that's why a lot of jazz is over standard progressions. I mean, the whole thing about improvisation is you can't improvise on nothing. You're always improvising on something. And good improvisers gather more information from the environment in order to be able to respond and make the most of what they're doing.
And I think a final but linked question to what you just discussed is the link between planning and improvising, and how you see that negotiation.
Absolutely, it's fundamental. And I think what happens outside the classroom, the way you plan things, the way you look at what you're going to do, it's absolutely essential to do that. I think as you become more, and certainly from the teachers that I did research with, as they became more experienced, they realized that the nature of their planning, they didn't need to do it in such detail, but also they had the confidence to say, I mean, one teacher said to me, Nick, if it's not going, I've got the confidence now, I just chuck it out. I just start again. And if that doesn't work, it doesn't matter. I'll chuck that out and I'll start again. It's having a confidence that you've got a repertoire of resources that you can draw on.
Thank you. Right. I would like to thank Nick for his contribution today. And if we can all give him a virtual round of applause, that would be lovely. Thank you, Nick, for your input. And